Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Crosswalk.com's Inside the Editor's Room podcast, where our editors give you a look at how we tackle the trends and issues of the day from a Christian perspective. I'm Stephen McGarvey, the editor-in-chief here for Crosswalk.com, and this week I'm joined by Rachel Dawson, our design editor, and Sean McAvoy, our managing editor. Kelly has the day off today. We want to talk about if we could pick any person that we met with or had dinner with from history, who would that be? So who would be our mystery dinner guests, sort of the ultimate interviews, if you will? And we've broken this down into three categories. Who would we like to meet from the Bible? Who would we like to meet from history who is no longer with us? And what living person today that we've never spoken with or interviewed or met would we like to sit down with for a one-on-one, either a dinner or a lunch or, a cup of coffee? So, yes, coffee.
That would be my choice. All right. So what did we want to get started with? The Bible category here?
Why don't we start first with the Bible category? Who from the Bible do you wish you could meet? Rachel Dawson.
My choice obviously could not be Jesus, because that would just be...
I think
that's the answer to everything.
It could be.
I think we should start with that rule that we're not going to...
We
all would like to admit that we would love to meet Jesus at some point.
He's historical. He's still living, and he's in the Bible.
Yeah. That's right. But for the purposes of this discussion, who other than Jesus from the Bible would we like to meet?
I picked Peter for this one. He's somebody that throughout Scripture I just find myself kind of resonating with, and really just like loving the role that he plays throughout Scripture. Is just somebody that is super kind of impulsive and really honest, and he never pretends to get it all right, or that he pretends to have this perfect walk with Christ in real life, but he kind of just is really real about who he is and what he believes, and even his doubts. When the time when he walks on water and he's all in at first, then he's like, oh gosh, whoa, and he starts drowning, and it's just this picture of I get that, and I resonate with that, and would just love to hear more about kind of his story and what it was like to be with Jesus, and to just be such an impactful person for the gospel.
And hey, what's with this Pope thing? Did we get that right or wrong?
I know. So many questions.
So many. I kind of wavered when I asked my kids about this morning. They said, "Yeah, well, of course the answer is Jesus, Dad." And I said, "I'm trying to break out of that." So my next thought was, well, who walked with Jesus? And I did think about Peter as well. But then I went Old Testament, and I was thinking, well, Solomon's got that wisdom thing going, and I would like to ask him about all the ladies. And then Job's got that suffering thing going, and I would like to ask him about that. But I settled on Luke, actually, because he wrote my two favorite books in the New Testament, both the book of Acts and his gospel. And just as the Gentile invited in just this person, educated person, to write this stuff down and follow around and get these stories, I just thought that there would be a wealth of information there, and just an experience of what it was like to kind of be grafted in and get all this information to be able to collect it, and that we're still reading it so many years later. What about you, Steve? I
thought about Luke too, because of the sort of the journalistic aspect of that, and that's certainly been part of the journalism has been kind of part of my life and career. I'm going to further the same theme of the New Testament, and say that after a lot of thought, I think the person that I would like to meet the most is the Apostle John, the Son of Thunder himself.
The disciple Jesus loved.
The disciple that Jesus loved. And there's a couple reasons for that. Certainly, John is mentioned as being in the inner circle of the people that were around Jesus, and I'm sure that I would have a lot to ask him about what that was like. But I'm really interested in John later in his life, when he wrote the book of Revelation from the vision that he had from the Lord. And I just think it would be fascinating to there's so many questions surrounding the book of Revelation. There's so much discourse and dispute about all of that. I kind of would be interested to ask him some very specific things like, so when you talk about the bear, is that a real bear that you saw, or is that like the Russian armies marching west, or whatever
how we interpret it today.
Yeah, or you talk about the dragon and the dragon chasing the woman around, and like, was that a literal dragon that you saw, or was that perhaps the Red Chinese Army, or just like when he wrote it? Like it's controversial. It's famously controversial about when Revelation was written. That I would just like, that would clear up so much stuff, so much debate among Christians about what all of this means. And yeah, I'd like to, like, he would be the one I'd pick because I just like to clear some of that up.
Yeah, on next week's podcast, Steve McGarvey's interview with John the Apostle will clear up all the eschatology questions you ever had.
So, moving on to our next category, what living person would you like to meet, have a Sunday brunch with, and talk to them about their life and work? Rachel, who'd you pick?
I actually could not pick between two for this one, but they're really similar reasoning, and they're actually similar people, kind of.
So you're going to give us a tie?
I am going to give you a tie.
Yeah, you guys can all three sit down.
I think it'd be great. So Wendell Berry, the author, and Mary Oliver, who is a poet, are both people that are in their 80s, and so I had to honestly check, like, are they still living?
We apologize that by the time this airs, they may no longer be living.
Fingers crossed they're still with us. They're both just very thoughtful writers, and they're both kind of reclusive, and they don't give a lot of interviews. So they're not people that you can just Google them and find out, like, all of their latest headlines or blog posts. Like, they're not people that are really forthcoming with things about their lives.
Don't have a YouTube channel.
No, not at all. And none of them are on social media or anything, but they have such prolific work, and it's all just very rich and meaningful to me. I found a lot just really that I've loved about their thoughts on the way they view the world, the way they view faith, just from really kind of different characters. And they're both super kind of quirky, and they just I love them both, and I think it would be fascinating to I think that would be a coffee date with both of them, just in some corner somewhere, and talk about books and writing and faith and kind of the world and agriculture. Wendell Berry writes a lot about how we should take care of the world and be good stewards of that. And,
sure.
I just think they're both brilliant and talented, and I would love to kind of soak all of that up from them.
Excellent.
Yeah, Sean, what about you?
Those are interesting choices. This was a harder one for me because, well, I don't exactly have a hard time sharing myself and who I am. Sometimes I do in certain circles where I feel like a lot of my potential answers here would give away a little bit more than I want to. For example, this is not my answer, but I find our last president, Barack Obama, fascinating in many ways, though I did not vote for him, and we do not share a lot of the same politics, and I think sitting down with him could be a very interesting time.
Yeah.
But amongst the choices that I had written down, I was like, well, do I go Bono? Do I go J.K. Rowling? She's a very fascinating person to me. I actually settled on someone who's older than your folks, Rachel.
Okay.
I believe he's 92 now, and that is another former president, Jimmy Carter, who, in my opinion, another person, I don't agree with him on everything, but I think I was 8 to 11 during his presidency, and I never understood why all the other kids on the grade school playground hated this man, and he's the worst president ever. But in my opinion, he's come to be the best ex-president that we've ever had and the best statesman. So the kind of issues that he speaks out about are ones that I would like to ask him a whole lot of things about, whether I agree with him or not. And since the chance is growing slim with him being in his 90s now, that is someone who I would like to meet with soon.
Get it while you can.
My living person will probably surprise you guys. I picked John Lasseter, who is the chief creative of Pixar and Disney Animation. He has a fascinating career where he, after he graduated from college, went to work for Disney and decided that through a series of events to pursue animation with computers, which was in the late 70s and the early 80s when he was first at Disney, just didn't, that was a faux pas, and the establishment in animation thought it was ridiculous and expensive and not something that they should pursue. And he ended up pursuing it to the detriment of his career at Disney. But he, through that experience, at that time ended up meeting other people who had this sort of the same vision for what computers could do for animation, and then ended up going to Lucasfilm to work in the division of Lucasfilm that ended up being sold off to Steve Jobs, who spun it off to its own business, which became Pixar. And so, despite his background being in technical animation, ends up being one of the chief people at Pixar who rolled out Pixar and started Toy Story, and they've created this company that's known for its technical prowess, and yet their vision for what storytelling can accomplish was always fascinating to me. And consequently, they produced some of the most amazing stories of the last 20 years or so.
And now they're part of Disney.
And now and it's come full circle where when Disney purchased Pixar, John Lasseter came back and is now the head of Disney Animation as well as Pixar. And at this stage in my life, one of the most fascinating things for me is to see people who can combine good storytelling with good business, and just like get some advice for we try to do creative things.
We do
here at Crosswalk at Salem, but where there's always sort of that business logic that we have to run everything through, and I'm just. The two seem to compete so much. Like, do we make decisions based on creativity? Do we make decisions based on business? And, John Lasseter seems to be one of these guys who's like really figured that out, how to do that with Disney. Mm-hmm. You especially look at, some of the more recent Disney and Pixar films that have been so incredibly interesting and creative, and yet also done very well for their business. So for that, my choice would be John Lasseter.
I like it.
So
nice.
So on to our third category. What non-living person, if you could wave a magic wand and have a meeting with, have a dinner with, non-living, I guess from history, certainly can be recent history, who would you choose to bring back to life so that you could talk to them one last time? Rachel, who's your pick?
Yeah, this one, I wanted so badly to say C.S. Lewis, and it just felt like the cliche Christian answer. This is super random, but also just would be so much fun to have dinner with Alexander Hamilton, because I am obsessed with the musical. I think it's fantastic. I listen to it very often, and I think it would be hilarious to sit down with the man himself, who was such a really kind of forgotten person in history that has now become probably one of the most famous people in history that everyone thinks was a president and gives actually more fame to now.
He's on the money.
Yeah. But to be able to sit down with him and listen through the soundtrack, or even honestly go see it, that would be great if I could get tickets and sit with Alexander Hamilton himself and see the play. But I think it would be so fun. He has a fascinating life story. I'm in the middle of his the massive biography written about his life, and just kind of coming up from totally nothing and having people that kind of took pity on him to send him over to America, and then just the crazy series of events that followed in his life. I think he would just be one of those people that I could just sit and hear his life story for hours and just be really intrigued by what he did, how he did it, the mistakes he made along the way, because he definitely made some, and just kind of hear what it was like to be one of the kind of founding fathers of America.
Mm-hmm. That's cool.
Yeah.
How about you, Sean?
Well, I was actually looking at an article when people answer this question, and it came up, the most popular answers are actually, believe it or not, are scientists.
Yeah.
And then, you have authors, entertainers and athletes, religious figures. And having already answered a political figure for my previous answer, I was thinking someone, okay, so I was really interested in what happened with the civil rights movement in the 20th century. I'm also a big sports fan and even a big Dodger fan, so I settled on, who else but Jackie Robinson would be a better answer for me to sit down, and especially because I'm very intrigued by people who were the first at something, kind of like with, if one of the things I would ask President Obama is what his experience was like in being the first black president. Jackie Robinson had to be the first for a lot of things, not only in Major League Baseball, but in starting a whole movement that carried on into the 50s and 60s. And so just to be able to ask him about that experience and what it took to be someone who, the most famous part of his story is that he was chosen by Branch Rickey as someone who would have the capacity to not fight back. when all the pressures got to him. So what was that really like? And it's just a fascinating thing to me to not lash out when everyone is lashing out at you. It's a very Christian sentiment in a lot of ways. So I think Jack would be a great interview.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, my pick, I'm going to reference your last pick for the person who's still living, to pick a contemporary of that time, someone who is no longer living in politics, and that is Ronald Reagan.
I thought that would be your answer.
Did you?
Yes, I did.
Now, I struggled with this because I think a lot of people would say Ronald Reagan, and I would try to think of somebody else who's no longer with us from recent history that I would really love to interview. And I couldn't think of somebody that I wanted to talk to more than Ronald Reagan. Because
Carter and Reagan were my formative years.
Yeah, well, mine too, in that the first election I remember was the one from 1980 when I was in first grade, and we had an election in our first grade class, and Jimmy Carter won, but I voted for Reagan. So, and I remember at the time, like you remember your parents' reaction to Jimmy Carter. I remember my dad's reaction to Ronald Reagan was incredibly positive, and how he didn't much care for Carter and he thought Reagan would do a better job. And I love to look at historical people, historical characters, and see, like, what was their life like when things weren't going their way.
Oh, yeah.
And for Reagan, that was 1976 when he almost won. He almost beat the sitting president for the Republican nomination.
He wasn't a young man.
And he wasn't. And he left that, thinking that he was done with politics. And I think everybody else around him thought, well, this was his shot. Now he's done. And it ended up coming back and winning 4 years later. Like, that time is incredibly fascinating to read about what happened to him then and the decisions that he made. And I've just always been fascinated with that, and I'm decided that I'm going to own that and say I would love to go back in time and meet Reagan and talk about that in particular. At a different time in my life, I spent some time in Washington D.C., and when I first went to Washington, he was still alive, and we had that conversation, like, what politicians would you want to meet? And I said Reagan, and somebody who had been around a little bit longer. This was when his health started to fail. Said, well, you better hurry up because, I don't think he's taking any interviews these days. And this was in the mid-90s. So he's always fascinated me. I know it's a little bit cliched to say it, but I would love, I hope for non-cliched reasons, that would be the person that I would wave the wand over and say, yes, before you go, I have a few questions.
Yeah, he actually almost made my list, even for just to know what we could glean from people suffering from Alzheimer's later on, or just the early career he had. I went with athletes and civil rights, and you went with entertainment and politics there. So he's someone who can straddle both areas. Yeah, definitely a great president.
All right, well, that brings us to the end of our show. Thank you to Sean and Steve for sharing your dream dinner guests. Thanks to Steven Sanders and Kyle Fletcher, our audio engineers. You can find us over on Facebook. We would love to hear the people from the Bible or living or no longer living people that you would love to have dinner with. You can find us there at facebook.com/crosswalkpodcast. And to find more about the topics we talked about today or listen to any of our past episodes, you can find us at InsideTheEditorsRoom.com. And be sure to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Google Play, TuneIn, or SoundCloud to get all of our episodes downloaded right to your phone. Thanks for listening.